Hi everyone, it's Darlene. Welcome back for another card video. Today's card uses these cute little hedgehogs from the Let's Roll set by Clearly Besotted. I used them to create this penny slider card. I will link to this if you want to take a look at that video again. And I'm also using the My Favorite Thing Speech Bubbles dies. You can see that they're stitching on the top and the bottom, so you can use the positive or the negative. And also I'm using these Hello You Thinlits by Stampin' Up. You of course could use any sentiment die. I'm going to start with some green apple cardstock by Simon Says Stamp. It's my favorite green cardstock. I'm going to arrange my dies on my magnetic platform, and I'm using these Sizzix Mylar shims. They just add a little tiny bit of extra pressure for the dies that require a little bit deeper cutting like this sentiment. So I'm going to take these out. I'm going to save the little tiny pieces inside the H, the E, and the two L's, and the O, I guess. So I'm going to put those off to the side because I'll use them again. And then I'm going to cut that same hello out of some Nina Solar White cardstock. And this one I had trouble getting out, so I just used my paper piercer and pushed them through those little holes, and that's what those holes are for. To make my sentiment stand out just a little bit more, I'm going to emboss it. So I have a piece of scratch cardstock that I'm going to adhere just a couple of spots of my sentiment to. This is just to temporarily hold it so that I can get even coverage of the Versamark ink. So here's my Versamark. And I'm just going to apply it liberally to my sentiment, and it actually popped off, which is no big deal, so I just peeled it off and I'm just going to ink it up again. And I just tried to press it down with my fingers, but then I grabbed my paper piercer since it was handy, and I just pressed it down back into those little adhesive spots. So I'll ink it up some more, make sure I get it all covered. And one of them popped up again, but again, no big deal. It's just to temporarily hold it in place. I will cover it with some clear embossing powder and then heat it to set it. And you don't have to worry about the embossing powder clinging that sentiment to the paper. It really just pops off quite easily. So I'll just take my paper piercer and just stick it underneath there, and it pops right off. I'm going to hold it up to the camera so you can get a good look. I don't know if you can see the shine, but it really is a nice, smooth, even, shiny finish. Alright, next step is to inlay the white into the green. So I'm going to take some surgical tape, and I actually cut it a little bit too long, so I'm just going to smush it there in the corner. And the reason why I can do this is because this tape is so thin that it really, even if it bunches up, it's not a big deal. So I'll cover the whole back with the tape so that it's nice and sticky just on the front. I'm going to take my sentiment and I'll lay it right in there, and I have my paper piercer handy just to kind of push it along if it needs it, but it was actually really easy to place inside. And then I'll put my pieces inside that were green that I saved from before, and the big ones were easy, but then when I started doing the little ones, it was falling on the floor and I couldn't pick it up. So I got my pick-me-up stick, which is what I have this for, and this has a sticky end to it, and you can pick up these little pieces really easily. And then it's also got a piece at the end that you can pop out to use on with your left hand, but I was just using my finger. It was just fine. So I'm just going to put all these into place and use my paper piercer also to kind of arrange it once I get it into the correct hole. Because I added those Mylar shims to my sandwich, it also gave me a little bit of a dry embossed impression around the hello, which I actually really liked. Now I'm going to start working on my hedgehogs. I'm using this XL Canson paper mixed media. It's 98 pounds, so it's very thin, but I'm using it because it's a very bright white color. I like that. Because it's so thin, you don't want to use it for applications where you're applying a lot of moisture to your paper. I positioned my hello speech bubble at the top so I can see where I should stamp my hedgehogs. I'm going to stamp the top one first. That's because I'm going to mask him before I stamp the one underneath. So I'm going to use some VersaFine Black Onyx ink, and the reason why I'm using this ink is because it'll stay wet for a while and it'll give you some time to clear emboss it. So I'm going to stamp him down, and then I'll add some clear embossing powder, and then I'll heat it to set it. And this will also make the hedgehogs pop a little bit. And while I've got that stamp inked up, I'm going to place a post-it on top of the one I just stamped because I know that's exactly where it's going to stamp again. I'll ink it up, and I'm going to create a mask with this post-it. And because I only need the bottom part, I'm just going to fussy cut the bottom part of the hedgehog. So I'll go all the way around. I actually did cut into all of those grooves, but then once I got to the side, it was done. So I'll just place my mask on that first hedgehog, and then I'll put my second one on top of it so that it overlaps. and I'm going to ink him up with the same VersaFine Black Onyx ink. You want to make sure that they're centered so that it looks right. And then when I take the mask off, you'll see that it looks like the top one is sort of sitting on the bottom one's head, and because the head sort of curves in at the middle, it does look like he's sort of smushing him a little bit. So I'll put some clear powder on that one also and heat it to set it. I'm going to be coloring these guys with some water-based markers and a blender pen. I'm using Stampin' Up! Markers, but you could use Memento markers, Distress markers, just any markers that are water-based. And what you'll do is apply marker directly to the cardstock, and you can see how dark this comes out, so you certainly would not want to color the whole thing with the marker because it would be way too dark. So just apply a little bit of color, and the blender pen will actually pull the color outward and lighten it up as it pulls it out. It works similar to an aqua painter where once the color runs out, then you just grab some more. So I'm going back and forth between the white area and the chocolate chip area and just pull as much color as I want. And the nice thing about the blender pen is that you can always add more color. So I'll put some more because I want it to be a little bit darker on the edge. So I'm just going to tap the color in, and then I'll pull it with my blender pen. Now when you first apply the blender pen to the marker, I would start in the white area and move close to the chocolate chip, then start pulling the chocolate chip out. I feel like that just gives you a little bit more control than if you start your blender pen inside the chocolate chip and try to work it out. And you can do that if you want to, but it might be easier when you're learning to start in the white area first. And as you can see, you get a nice, really pretty blended look, and you can make it as dark or as light as you want. Now the difference between the blender pen and like an aqua painter where you're doing watercolor is the blender pen isn't quite as forgiving as the watercolor. So you want to be careful to stay in the lines because it's really hard, like with the Copic markers, for example, you have the zero blender pen, which could push your color back over the line. But with this, once you put your marker down, there's really not a good way to get it up. Now that I'm finished with that color, I just use it on a piece of scratch paper and the color will come right off and I'm ready for the next one. I wanted to see if I could lighten up some of that area, so I took the blender pen without any color, kind of like I would do with a colorless blender or an aqua painter without any color. And as you can see, you can pull a little bit of color out. It is getting a little bit lighter where I'm coloring, but it is a little bit harder to do than when you're watercoloring. I'm going to do the bottom hedgehog the same exact way. I am going to add a little bit of extra chocolate chip right underneath the top hedgehog because there'll be a little bit of a shadow where he's sitting on his friend. I wanted to add a little more color to their feet, but I didn't want to use the marker directly to the paper, so I just put some on my craft mat and then I picked it up with the blender pen. And this is another way to apply color, and you'll see me do that with the grass because the grass is going to be green. I don't have a marker, I just have an ink pad. Now it's time to move on to the inside of the hedgehogs. I'm using Crumb Cake. It's kind of it's a craft type color, and I'm going to color right along the edges. I really don't want to add a lot of color to the inside. I want it to be very faded, so I'm just putting some right at the edge and blending that line with my blender pen. You notice also that I add a little bit of a neckline to the left side of that bottom hedgehog, just add a little bit more dimension. Next is the grass. I'm using the green apple ink, which matches the cardstock that I used at the top. And you'll see that I'm going to start off with a much lighter color of the green. So if you pick up a little bit of ink, you'll get a light color. If you pick up a lot of the ink, you'll get a darker color. So you see I'm kind of picking up just a little bit of ink, so I get almost a yellowy color here, and that'll be my base for the grass. And now I'm starting to pick up more of the ink on my blender pen in the bigger puddles on my craft mat. And also if I hold down my pen to the cardstock, it'll add more color to it. So I'll pick up a big glob of it and I'll just sort of hold my pen to the cardstock, and that'll give me some darker dotted areas. So I'll do it right here. You can hold it down and add some more dots, just to get a little bit of variety so you get some light and some dark colors. And you don't want to color, you just want to kind of dot because you want the texture of grass, not just a massive green color. Alright, now that that's done, I can assemble my card. I'm going to put some Stampin' Up! Dimensionals on the speech bubble. And the reason why I did that is the first time I did this, I used the Scotch foam tape, and it was so heavy that my card was kind of weighted on one side and it just didn't feel right. So once I added the Stampin' Up! Dimensionals, which are much lighter adhesive, then the card just felt better in my hands. And then I'll flip this over and I'll add some of my ATG tape runner. I'll use my MISTI to line up my panels since I'm going to be covering the whole card base, which is just 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch folded. Once my panel hits the corner, I'll just press it down and then I'll get a nice perfect mat onto my card base. And that's the card for today. I love these little guys, they're so cute. I'm really glad I added all that dark chocolate chip to the edge of their fur because it really makes them pop off the cardstock against that white background. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed that and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.